This is a country where if you work hard, you can realise your dreams and go anywhere you want to, regardless of class, regardless of race, regardless of your gender. That's been my story. That was the story of my parents who came to this country with nothing in the 1960s. But through the opportunities that were presented to them in this country, through their hard work, we were able to take our place as British citizens and realise our potential. That story is no more clearer than with the girl from Grantham who started above a grocer's shop and won a place at a grammar school and studied chemistry at Oxford University, got elected to Parliament when there were only 3% of women in Parliament. She defied the odds, Mrs. Thatcher. When all the stakes were set against her, she overcame the obstacles. That was before Britain joined the European Union. That was before quotas. That was before all women shortlists. That was before positive discrimination. So the progress of women has been happening for a very long time before we joined the European Union. It has been continuing during our membership of the European Union. And let me tell you, it will continue when we leave the European Union. It is a fallacy to say that because of the European Union and our membership of it, women's rights have dramatically improved. Yes, there have been some benefits, but most of the main progress, most of the equal pay legislation, most of the sex and race discrimination laws, most of the workers' protections were domestically enacted, regardless of our membership of the EU. The European project is failing Britain, has failed our interests, is out of date, undemocratic, and we have a better future outside of the EU. I voted to leave, like the majority of my constituents in Fareham and the majority of British people, because I wanted this country to take back control over its destiny, to become a genuine self-governing democracy, so that we, citizens of our country, can have an honest and frank debate about immigration, which actually means something, as opposed to having no control over the numbers of people coming into this country. The workers' protections, the equal pay legislation has all been domestically initiated. Maternity leave was installed in this country long before the European Directive on maternity leave was introduced, and we were above the EU minimum. We have a woman leading Britain as we leave the European Union. For me, that speaks volumes. We face a great opportunity. Brexit is happening. As women, we have an amazing chance to play a role in the next chapter of our history. Let's come together and do it.
Europe. If you didn't have it, you'd end up inventing it. By cooperating with others, we have not just doubled but multiplied our returns, whether economic or social, and it's women who know that most of all. Because since its inception, the EU has been our champion, literally. The founding treaty of the European Economic Community required equal pay. Even when our own government didn't ensure equal pay for equal value, it was the EU that made them change our law to make sure that British women received a fair deal. That you couldn't pay dinner ladies less than bin men. Decide that they were more valuable. It's not just our right to equal pay that the EU has fought for, it is our maternity rights too. You might say they were already in our legislation, but not in the format that we have them now. See, the European Court of Justice does have its uses. It gave us protection against losing our jobs when pregnant, even when our government would not. It stopped employers dismissing women for having a baby on the basis of what is called the bastard defence. Changes at every turn opposed by our government, changes reflecting what the EU did best for women. It put them on the agenda. It mainstreamed them. It asked the question. And it kept asking, forcing the pace of change in our long, slow march to getting just the same rights and opportunities as a bloke. For women looking for a common set of rights, America might not be the place that we want to start thinking about doing business with straight off, because America is the only country in the world that doesn't offer any maternity paid leave. In fact, there you have to take disability leave to cover childbirth. Our partnership with Europe has driven up standards and meant that with those we trade with, those we work with, where we travel to and compete with, reach for the top too. So when you're kicking the European Union, dismissing it, you're cutting off our nose to spite our face at a time when we probably need all the friends that we can get. There may be one Brexit, but there's many ways to do the deal. Don't let your fundamental rights to trade, to work, and not to be harassed to be taken away. Make sure your politicians know what are your interests, whether it's your rights to travel, work, or live freely as a citizen. Don't let Brexit become an excuse for inequality. VAT existed on tampons long before we joined the European Union. It was called the purchase tax. We could give all European citizens status here now. They don't have to be bargaining chips. Don't let politicians tell you that Brexit stops them doing things or is responsible for things any more than believing it will be a land of milk and honey. Europe, when you don't have it, you will miss it.
We're being told by the Prime Minister that there's only one version of Brexit, but I would argue there are a lot of versions, and we have to fight for the best one. We've got to challenge her view of that. We have to make sure that we have choices. A different government would make different choices, I hope. I would love to see a general election. Unfortunately, I rather think that wouldn't throw up much more of a change. We saw during the whole Brexit debate that women were not well represented. They weren't well represented by, well, in fact, I would say on either side. Something like 16% of TV appearances featured women, 16%. I mean, that's really quite shabby. And I know that I ended up on lots of debates simply because they were desperate for a woman. They were casting around for somebody who would to be a representative woman. And so women were not heard, I think, on either the Leave side or the Remain side. And now what we've seen is that the divide in British society has opened up and discrimination has in fact been exacerbated. What I'm trying to do in Parliament and outside is to make sure that these wounds can be healed, whatever that takes. And some of it will be legislative. Some of it will happen in the House of Parliament. We have to get the right bills through there, the right amendments to the government's bill, so that we can say that Britain is a defender of civil liberties and human rights. And I do think that that's possible.
So much uncertainty, so much insecurity and so much instability has been unleashed, not just for the UK, but for the whole of the European Union by the referendum result. No one knows what's going to happen, so there's still a hope and chance to try and shape the outcomes. But that uncertainty, that political, economic, social uncertainty across the European Union is not good for anyone. Except certainly the only people who seem to be benefiting are the peddlers of a particularly toxic brand of nationalism, misogyny and racism throughout the continent. And we know that where there's that kind of uncertainty, women are always doubly the victims. And minority women or migrant women 10 times more likely to be the victims of that kind of hate speech and misogyny. We strongly believe, and the trade union TUC here in the UK believes that the EU has been central in advancing the rights of British women workers, whether it's equal pay for work of equal value, protection against sex discrimination, sexual harassment, these are all laws that come from Europe, treatment particularly of pregnant workers and new mothers, but also rights to parental leave for fathers and mothers. But very important, I think, has been the extension of equal rights for part-time workers, equal rights to pensions, leave, and maternity leave, for example, and paid holiday. And that obviously overwhelmingly affects women who are much more likely to be part-time workers. What we do know that is, with a government committed to a sort of low-wage, low-tax, deregulated economy, it's unlikely that those kind of protections are going to be made a priority unless that's absolutely demanded vocally. And so the other thing is that no future benefits, which are currently being negotiated in the EU, will benefit British women. So things like current discussions about a new carers leave, for example, or the extension of maternity leave. We've seen how the referendum in the UK has unleashed an ugly and sometimes violent racism and misogyny against women, and I think that doubly impacted on refugee women, migrant women, and asylum seekers. So people who are actually fleeing situations of violence and war who are coming into situations of violence and hatred. And that's something we absolutely, as feminists, need to challenge. We have to unite to build and spread a much more positive narrative of the contribution and experience of women who migrate, whether they're asylum seekers or refugees or simply exercising their right to free movement. And we have to absolutely build strategies to ensure that any woman living in the UK, their rights continue to be not just protected as they currently stand, but continue to be extended into the future.